Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Campus to Contracts. I'm here with Mason, as always, and lots of news since the NCAA football title game playoff matchups. The big headlines that I keep reading, and I'm just going to go over them with Mason, who's an insider, obviously with his management and agency firm and what he does for players. So I read the news, or as we all know, the filtered news. And the biggest news collection that I got was the college football playoff format. The seeding was poor, and it didn't get as many eyeballs as the old bowl tournaments and things of that nature. I kind of read that like, I don't know. I read it like what it is. It's writers writing stories. Yes, the ratings were a little bit down, but from a standpoint of a fan, I think the fans enjoyed it. And I think the college atmosphere, the college teams, what is their view of this format or the playoff? Do you have more teams that are more excited? Do you have more teams that feel they have a shot now? Or because of the format, that like a Boise, like, oh, we're never going to do it because we have to play 4 hard teams or three hard games?
Well, look at it this way. So Boise State, for example, they were ranked third in the country or third in the playoff bracketing. So they actually got a bye week. So they played the least amount of possible games in order to win a national championship. As far as like the vibe with most universities, there's a lot more opportunities to win a national championship now. You'll have schools that could lose 1 game, that could lose 2 games and still make the college football playoffs. So obviously that gives you a couple more lives to play with during the season, gives you a couple more chances to figure things out. And as soon as you get that top 12 seed, you're able to go into the college football playoffs, and it'll definitely give you a better chance at reaching the national championship. This go around, when it comes to this playoff structure versus the last structure, you obviously have to play more games. But again, you end up having a better and more realistic opportunity of getting to the college football playoff championship.
So I'm a big hockey guy, big hockey fan, especially when it comes to college hockey. And one of the things that I've always noticed with college hockey is you get 16 teams that make it to the NCAA Frozen Four, similar to what college football is. But what I always have liked about it is everybody knows in college hockey you're not going to go undefeated. You may have a great year, but one of the things that they do is they rearrange their lines, they rearrange their systems, they get players who may not be that experienced, they get them up to speed over 20 games, figure it out. Because of this new format, because you need the depth that you need, do you see teams that are going to look at depth now and start playing like different, not play guys all the time, bring guys in and out, give them more breathers as the season goes on to allow to have a second tier that's as good as your first tier? Because I think that's also was really relevant when it came to these playoff games, is you needed to have some depth and you have to develop your depth. You can't just go in with one, here's my starting defensive end, and he's going to play all the games. You want him in and out. You want to get the next defensive end some reps. Are you seeing that with these teams where they're starting to look at, I need the depth if I'm going to make this longer push?
Absolutely. But really what I think it is that schools are able to pay for depth now. Right. So with the new NIL rules, with the new collectives, with all the money that's being tossed around and the position of the general manager being established in college football, universities, programs, football programs are beginning to be able to have a better second string, a better third string, because they're able to pay for players. They're able to get players from the transfer portal. They're able to get higher profile high school players. They're even able to now get junior college players that are possibly better, simply because they can afford to have that many good players on one roster. So when you think of it like that, right, ordinarily 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you would just have the best players, select their schools on which they could go play the quickest or go to the powerhouses. Now some of the schools that weren't your typical powerhouses are able to, fund their rosters and able to pay players and convince them to come over to their university, come play for their program. So in that case, the depth is going to naturally increase. You're going to have better second string players, you're going to have better third string players, and then you're going to see some of those smaller schools that can't keep up monetarily. They're not going to have as good second stringers, as good third stringers. You're going to start seeing a lot more schools that can pay for players get pretty heavy in their roster, get pretty good at their roster. And we're already seeing that virtually there's no such thing as a walk-on anymore, right? They're able to add more players than just the 85 players that were allowed on scholarship. So because of this payment system, we're going to be able to see more more good players on one roster.
So that brings me back to my first question about Boise State. If you're a smaller program and you don't have that depth, how do you compete in the playoffs? How does that I mean, what you're talking about is with having the wealth, you're able to get the depth. With a 12 or even a 16 team playoff, which looks like it may end up going to, you're going to need the depth. And if you're a smaller program, how are you able to get the depth, find those gems, if you will, that other teams aren't seeing or aren't finding?
Well, granted, when you're talking about a school that was in a group of 5 category, right? So you're not in the SEC, you're not in the ACC, you're not in the Big 10 or the Big 12. Your path to the playoffs is going to be relatively easier. You're probably going to have less losses, 1 to 0 losses, and then you're going to be able to crack the top 12. Whereas the other universities, right, in the Big 10 and the Big 12 and the SEC and the ACC, just because you lose the conference championship doesn't mean that you're barred from going to the college football playoffs. It now becomes the highest bid, or how the team has played throughout that season, who they played against, how well they did it against those big playoff teams, those bigger teams. And there's also just a lot more concentration, because in those conferences, in the Big 10 and the Big 12, there's a lot more teams now, because the Pac-12 doesn't exist. They kind of split them up. So since there's a lot more teams, it's a lot harder for them to get to that playoff berth, right? You're not
Correct.
even going to be playing. There was a time where you could possibly play all of the teams in your conference. There was a time where you'd play half, and you'd be able to go to the conference championship and stuff like that. But in this day and age, it's so much harder. You're not going to be able to touch or see all the teams in your conference. So there's that boundary as well.
You're
Whereas
right.
the
If you
group
look
of
at
five schools,
if you look at Indiana, for instance, their schedule, if you are in the Big 10 and you play an Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, for instance, Penn State, you play those 4 teams, it's highly unlikely you're gonna end up in the playoff, because that's going to be difficult to play all 4 of those teams. But the chances of having all 4 of those teams on your schedule in a given year is not as high as it used to be, because there's so many teams, to your point earlier. So a team like Indiana can look really good, but not really play anybody in the Big 10.
well, hold on there. So Indiana is a very different case than a lot of schools. Now, their head coach Signetti is one of the best head coaches in college football. If you look at his history, you'll see that he was at James Madison. Before that, I believe he was at Elon. At both universities, he was a winner. He won a lot of games. He was able to get players that were not necessarily the top recruited players in their states or their regions to come to his university and play extremely well. Now, when you look at that Indiana roster, there's a lot of those players that were able to come from James Madison that had great years under Signetti and then go and move up and play at Indiana University. So there was a little bit more cohesion going on that roster. Those players were actually really good, and I wouldn't say that it was necessarily their strength of schedule that helped them get to the point that they got to, but it was a combination of a couple of things. Yes, obviously you need to get lucky, and you want to probably not face the blue bloods in your conference week after week after week. And you definitely want to get to the conference championship, and you definitely want to win the conference championship. But their success was really because they had a really good coach, and they got really good players to come to that university on such short notice. And that's just kind of one of the luck things about a lot of the universities that, we're going to start seeing that transition where you have players like at Ohio State that have been playing in that program, right? And then you're going to see other schools like Oregon where you have players that are coming from other universities that are coming there for money, that are coming there to create a new group. And you're going to see the difference between a program where you have players that have been established in that program and then players that have coming together every single year and trying to make something of themselves.
You're not wrong about the coach. I was just simply, the schedule was very beneficial to Indiana last year in the Big 10. But that's going to happen. Like Texas also, you could say Texas in the SEC, they didn't play a whole lot of teams in the SEC. Now Texas is, I would argue, a higher powerhouse than Indiana for sure, but they had a really nice schedule last year in the SEC, where before, if you could back up 5 years because of the Pac-10, 12, whatever they had, you didn't have to worry about facing, you had to face everybody in the conference or a lot of the teams. Not everybody, but a lot of the teams. Now you can avoid several of the great teams and have a really good year and make the playoffs, and then you can move that roster or get that depth. But going back to like a Boise State without the financials, but what you're arguing, and your point has always been, especially when you're managing talent, there are these gems that are always out there that are not the 5 stars, that are not, a 4-star, that are very, very good players that could easily move up the ranks as they go into college. So that's always been difficult, but how much more difficult is it today with the money in the college game to find those lower starred players and know they're going to turn into being stars?
The difficult part comes in finding them. I will say this. The more work I do and the more I'm around people and the more I'm getting to know coaches, staffs, and general managers, both in college and the pros, it doesn't appear that they watch as much film as you would think. And that is a couple of things. They can rely on transfer portal guys, players that have established themselves in college, so they don't really have to, roll the dice on a player. But when it comes to those high school talented players, when it comes to actually recruiting, it comes down to just watching film, to studying the players that you are interested in, to understanding who would fit in your scheme, not to always just go to a transfer portal and say, this kid played well at this university, so I want to get him on my team. Or, some of these schools are actively recruiting players that are actively on other rosters. Hey, like that defensive back at Cincinnati or whatever, or the defensive back at Ohio State, we want him on our team because of how well he played this last season, and then they'll reach out to an agent or someone or anything that they can do to get that person to jump into the transfer portal and transfer to their university, or at least give it an inclination that they want to go. So, a lot of finding talent is always something that universities, programs, and general managers now need to always constantly do. When you find a good player at a small school, yes, his price is always going to range. The problem for the small schools isn't finding the players, because they have to do that anyways. They've never been able to just say, I want a 5-star and go get a 5-star. They've always had to watch film and get actually good players. The problem that they're having is that they cannot retain those players once those players come to fruition and once those players show their skill once given that opportunity. Bigger universities literally handpick players from smaller universities, from the UNLVs, from the Boise States, from the Utah States, from, just smaller programs, UCFs, James Madison. They just smaller programs, USF, and try to take those players and be like, hey, look, I know you can't get the amount of money at your school that I'm going to give you at my school. Come here, play here, and you're going to be a starter, right? They're literally saying you're going to be a written-in starter once you come here, right? And they give them all these deals and all these incentives and all these tricks and whatever in order to convince them to come. So the small schools don't have a problem with finding talent. They have a problem with retaining the talent.
That's just like every small business to a big business. It's the same deal.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a problem in the world. This is just how the world is. And then that's why I would, if I was a larger school and had the funds, I would be obviously looking at other college programs that can feed into that. But there's also this creates an undercurrent too, because there's the players who get displaced who did not perform at the higher schools, and they're getting either not the playing time they expected or they aren't getting the views they wanted. So then they go into the transfer portal to go to a smaller school so they can get more playing time or show off their skills, which is why you see teams like, for instance, Arizona State this year is a great example of kids who are leaving other programs and going to Arizona State to find a new beginning or finding more playing time. So it works kind of both ways. You have that, yes, you're an elite talent. Like I would think that the Ohio State wide receiver this year, the freshman kid who was unbelievable. If he was at Boise State and Boise State made a run in the playoffs and he's a freshman wideout, I would have been floored if he was still at Boise State at the end of this transfer portal, because every single program would go, I want that wideout. I want him to transfer to our program. Oregon, for instance, Ohio State, Michigan, you name it. Every program in America would be like, I want that kid. Ohio State has him, and Ohio State's not going to lose him because they're just going to make sure he stays, similar to Manning with Texas. But the undercurrent I'm talking about is, if you wanted to play in college and you're not getting the starts or the rep time that you expected, or you're in that second tier and you want to be in the first tier, you can go to a Boise State. You can make the playoffs. You can get a lot of eyeballs on yourselves for the NFL. Is that what you're also seeing? So you have the tiers taking the players away, but that top tier program is losing a player because they're not playing as much to the second tier, which again is not bad because they can still make the playoffs. Are you seeing that undercurrent as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a lot of transferring for many different reasons. And what I'll say is, to the players at those small universities that are really good, they don't always leave. A lot of them sometimes just stay committed to the program that they are at because I understand they're in a really good situation and, you know, they've had so much success. Boise State's running back stayed and he was offered millions, right? So,
And he is
I mean,
elite.
sometimes,
He's unbelievable.
yeah.
He's just
And
really
so,
great.
no, he is. And so sometimes players are going to choose to stay at that program, which is great for that program. But, you know, the exception doesn't make the rule. So there's going to still be a lot of cherry picking from smaller programs. Now, when it comes to those guys that make it to initially bigger programs and they see themselves after a year or a spring ball not contributing right away, they're still going to be in that little sweet spot of being able to go to another big university when they transfer because they're fresh out of high school. You know, they still have a lot of years behind them. They can redshirt and do some other things, right? But, you know, when it comes to transferring, it's really hard when the player hasn't played yet, right? Because now, as the school that's going to take that kid, you're going to be asking for his film and you're going to be seeing high school film of him, not last season, but 2 seasons ago, right? So you got to think about when these kids, and they don't produce their freshman year and they want to transfer, you know, they got to make sure, and hopefully they have someone that understands this process, that the university that they're going to be transferring to is going to give them that same opportunity, even though they kind of just wasted a year of eligibility, whether it was a red shirt or whether they actually burned a year of their on-field eligibility. So there's always going to be rules that come into play as well, because what the NCAA can't do is allow a player to just have unlimited red shirts, right? Unlimited opportunities to play 4 years. And then be like, oh, if you play 4 games, that counts as 1 year towards your eligibility, right? So you do see a lot of that. When it comes down to transferring, you got to make sure you know the rules. You got to make sure you know where your eligibility stands. And you want to try to have at least some sort of production to let that next university know that you're really ready to go.
And I think that, again, everyone understands this, and this is the clock. You have a certain clock as an athlete of how much time you have to really make your impact known. And whether that is a 2-year window, a 1-year window, but you don't know what that looks like. And if you're wasting it, or I wouldn't even call it wasting it, if you miss those opportunities or miss that train station, if you will, that train may not come back for a lot of these athletes. And that's hard. There are more opportunities today with you have the spring football season now in America. You also have the Canadian League. You also have, you have several leagues. I believe Europe is still a thing.
Yeah.
So there are other opportunities for these players, but college is really where you want to make your mark if you're going to make it to the NFL. And you only get so much time. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that's hard for an 18-year-old to realize, because an 18-year-old doesn't believe in that clock or that hourglass is running out on them, because they have so much. When you're 18, you just feel like your whole life you have so much time. So it's hard to have that urgency or understanding. To your point, the transfer portal, understanding that is very, very critical.
Yeah, I just was talking to a prospective client yesterday, and this client was playing during that COVID time.
Mm-hmm.
He had his COVID year still. He had a redshirt year and a medical redshirt and didn't use any of them. Didn't use any of them. And I was so confused by why no one was able to advise you on the type of rules that you could have used as leverage to, have a little bit more time in college and to be able to produce a little bit more in college. And he didn't have anyone to speak to about it. He didn't have anyone to consult for him or to advise him on any of these moves. So understanding the rules as a player, as a parent, is very, very crucial to that young man's career, because a lot of times the NCAA is giving these players opportunities to redeem themselves on the football field, to redeem the time that they have put in to becoming the best player that they want to be. And utilizing transfers correctly, utilizing red shirts correctly, utilizing the time correctly is one of the best ways that a player can give himself another opportunity. Just like the college football playoffs are giving teams with one loss, two losses, another opportunity to get to the college football championship, the way that the NCAA has structured the eligibility, players have opportunities to make changes, to make shifts, to divert their path, and to maneuver correctly in order to give themselves the best opportunity of going to the NFL, to play professional, right? And you mentioned the spring league. The spring league is doing its part as well as Canada. So if a player is just aware of, all these rules that they have, applicable to them, when they're aware of the calendar, they're aware of how the different leagues in the professional world work, and they're aware how the rules in college football work. In my opinion, there are players that may be on the bubble talent wise, but will have the opportunity in a year, with a year or 2 years, to get them over that bubble, to get them over that hump, and to be able to be seen and have an opportunity to play professionally.
And I would just, the hard part when I look at this from the outside perspective is when you're a parent of kids in high school, or let's just say you have the means or have the effort, these schools are not going to walk you through those rules, because it's kind of like that's up to the player if they want to go on the transfer portal. A coach isn't going to tell them how to use those red shirts or those rules. So learning those rules and being an advocate of that, I mean, that's a really gray area for a lot of these kids. So if you're expecting a school to walk you through how red shirts and transfer portals work, that's just not realistic. That's just not what the school is going to look at or do or try to do for you. Is that what that's what you're also saying, is if you don't have anybody helping you or mentoring you, the school's not going to just give you that up front.
Yeah, well, so here, I'll say this, a couple things about like the school's plan versus your plan is definitely going to be different, right? Your plan is probably going to look somewhere like, I want to play 3 years in college, or be in college for 3 years, and then try to go to the NFL, be in the NFL draft, right?
Right.
Whereas the school, depending on your talent level, if you're a major contributor, no university is going to say, I don't want him back. They're going to want you to maintain, to remain at that university, remain in the program for as long as humanly possible. Now, when it comes to redshirting, the university, if they see it as a benefit, if they see that you're a high school kid that may need a little bit more time in the weight room and need a little bit more time in development or with the playbook, they'll redshirt you. That's to their benefit. They're not going to burn your eligibility, because they want to get the most out of you. Now, there's also academic sides to this, where universities might want to prolong your academic career so that you maintain, the need to be there at the university. They could be like, oh, well, we expect him to be here for 4 years, or we expect him to be here for 5 years. They can prolong that. They can make sure that you're working towards your degree. You hit the percentages that you need to hit that are working towards your degree to make you eligible for each season. But they can also just make sure that they hit that minimal number to where, all right, well, then you could just continue to go to classes, and you'll have a very light workload during the season, and then in the off season a little bit heavier, and in the summer, a couple of classes here or there, and then eventually you'll be able to graduate, right? So the university has many tactics on, what they want to do with each player, what they want to do with each student, and how they want to use up as much time as possible for that player to be on campus and to be there and to continue to contribute to the football program and to the community of that university. Whereas the players and parents might have a different route. They might want to just boom, 3 and out, or do this or do that, or get a grad degree, or graduate first and then transfer to a different school later. So many other things. So it's very important that the player, the parent, and if they have an agent or someone to help them and consult them, that they understand the plan that they have going into the university versus the plan that the university has for that player. Because a lot of things change. You guys aren't on the same team when it comes to that a majority of the time.
And that goes back to the trust.
Yeah.
That there's a huge trust factor of like, do I trust the head coach, the program? I mean, you're talking about a GM at the university. Who can you trust? And then it goes back to the question of business. Because every time that you hear interviews of NFL players, basketball players, whatever league they're in, when did it become a business? They all have stories of it was a game, and then this is when I knew it was a business. So now that we have NIL, and now that college programs are basically like a pro league, as you had said many times earlier, when do these kids, because they're kids, are going to have that awakening of now it's a business?
I think that they're starting to get a taste of it when they're in high school, because agents, including myself, recruit high school players actively. That's how it is. But it probably doesn't get real for them until they're in college. And for some of them, in the situation of where the university, the coach or the position coach or the coordinator says, hey, we don't need you back next year. You're probably not going to play. You need to enter the transfer portal and go find a new college. That's probably when they realize it's an actual business. Because think about it. I mean, most likely that staff wasn't the staff that recruited that kid if he's been there for 4 or 5 years, right? But in the case that he is, and they're still asking him to leave, like, such a change in relationship by the time when he was in high school as a senior and that coach is talking to him and his parents versus now, you're about 21, 22, 23 years old, and the coach is like, yeah, you're not going to play here next year. So you need to find a new home, right? So I try to urge parents and players, even the young ones in high school, that this is a business. The only reason why that you're now on Zoom meetings with financial advisors, attorneys, agents, and all sorts, because it's a business. And a lot of the parents want to do the self-agent thing, which I understand. But this conversation that these people, that these staffs, that these agents, that these lawyers are having with you right now, that these financial advisors are having with you right now, is the same exact conversation they would be having with you if NIL didn't exist when you were a junior in college. So instead of waiting until you're a junior in college and you're deciding whether you want to come out right now or wait another year, you're like, those entities, those people, those businesses that are coming towards you now, it's the same conversation, except it's just happening for high school kids now, right? And then you have choices to make. There are some agents that are not NFLPA or CFLPA certified that are coming into the mix, and they're like, hey, you can sign with me. I can help you navigate college football. And then there's other agents like myself who are NFLPA and CFLPA certified, and they're like, hey, look, we can be with you not only through your college football career, but your professional career as well. And then, you got the financial advisors, you got the marketing agents, you got these manager guys. It's a mess, but it's exactly what it's like in professional football. It's exactly the same, because that's what it is now.
And to pretend, and this is the part that's really difficult, the people who don't like this or want to put the genie back in the bottle, it's not going back in the bottle.
No.
It's just not going to go to a point where this is what it will be or what it won't be. The other thing that I want to make a note for these kids that they don't even understand is there's persuasion and there is negotiation tactics that people are professional at. And I think that's one of the areas that a lot of people out there, I would say everybody in the audience, how many times have you been part of a negotiation if it's not buying your car? And if you buy a car, how stressed are you? That is what these kids are going to be going through all the time. That is why the people who enjoy those kind of negotiations and dealing with persuasion, because these coaches have it down to an art. They are excellent at motivating. They're excellent at persuading. They're excellent at getting you to buy into their message. And then to have a kid be excited about it, because again, there's a lot of kids who heck, adults who get excited when they listen to these coaches. That's why these coaches go around and give talks to business leaders. Think about that, everybody. These coaches will go into a business organization where guys are making six figures, and they motivate them to be better at the business that they're in, whatever it may be. That's how excellent these coaches are at doing what they do. So everyone can say X's and O's and this and that, but you're walking into their frame, and their frame is they're excellent at this. So if you're a dad or a mom who gets stressed out about buying a car and you think you're going to be there to help your kid, I hate to tell you, you're walking into a gunfight and you won't have anything. You have nothing.
What I will say to that is that a lot of times these coaches and these GMs realize that this is a business deal where the other side's really not going to fight me, right? Where there's only going to be a handful of guys that probably have super big offers that are willing to kind of like fight for more. So for the most part, it's like, all right, school A offers you 100K and school B offers you 200K, right? You know, school A you might play earlier. School B, you might have to sit, but you know, you choose what you want, right? There's no, all right, I'm going to tell school A, hey, look, school B's offering me 200K. I'm going to need 200K from you. I just need you to match it. There's none of that. There's no, you know, they're not understanding that this is a conversation. This is a preliminary negotiation before you get to campus. Matter of fact, you can't even sign the paperwork of how much you're getting paid until you're actually committed to the school. So for the most part, this is just an oral arrangement, right? This is just an oral arrangement. If they don't live by that oral arrangement, and you put them on blast like players have and agents have, then that's not a really good look at all for that university. So they have to stick by that. Understand the leverage that these players have with social media nowadays. You know, if there was no social media and I said to a player, hey, yeah, I'll give you 500K if you come here, and then boom, he gets here and I only give him 100K, what's he going to do? Can't say anything.
Write a letter.
Right?
Write to the newspaper.
You can't tell the masses that I lied to him.
Nope.
But you can now. You can. And then you can show it by action by saying, I'm not playing for this university anymore, and this is why. Right? And if you're a high-profile player, schools do not care. Schools will not care if you're a high-profile high school kid, because I've already went through this. The other schools that you decided to not go to, if that first school lies to you, screws you over, or does whatever, and you want to leave, those other schools that wanted you are still going to want you. They're still going to want you. They're going to offer you immediately within a day.
But that is a hard part of a kid's journey in life. You found a foundation, you found people who are there for you, and then suddenly it's like, oh, I turned my back on them. Do you think they're going to want me again? To your point, 100% they're going to want you again. You know how hard that is in your mentality as a kid to turn somebody down on a deal and then go back to them? That is a hard thing for kids and parents and people who are emotionally invested in a deal. It's hard. It's a very difficult thing for people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, that is a game changer because there's not a lot of parents and players that realize that. And they're not supposed to, right? They're young. The parents in this case are still young because their student athlete is young. They haven't gone through a lot of things. They haven't gone through, you know, trials and tribulations, universities, different coaches, different players, different, you know, just different everything, right? So even when those players that were at one university and then go to the pros and then suddenly get traded and they don't know why, right? That's probably their first time for the most part that they're going through things. This new generation of college players are going through a lot more than the older generation of pro players now, right? So when you're absolutely right about how they feel when it comes to, oh man, like I just said no to every other school. They don't care. If they believe that you're better than what they have, then why wouldn't they take you? Right? If they believe that you're better than what they've already got, why wouldn't they take you? You haven't played for them yet, or you played sparingly for them, or whatever the case is. If they still want you, they still want you for the same reasons.
Right.
Right? So it's an anxiety that, in my opinion, is not warranted completely, but they don't know that because they're not on this side of the line. On that side, I would say parents and players should be worried. When something doesn't go right, when you first get to a university, you might think that there's nowhere else for you to go. But there's plenty of universities that want you. There's plenty of universities that see that your talent is better than the current talent they have at that position or positions or whatever the case is. But they just don't think of it like that. Maybe it's because people want to be so humble, or, you know, I'm not going to say lack confidence, but they need to have more confidence in their ability and the reason why they're in this position in the first place. That there are teams that want you, that there are teams that would take your talent immediately.
I think a large part of it has to do with the human nature of things, the belief of that. If I rejected you, you're not going to want me anymore because I rejected you. And I think that belief system is very, again, it's in our human nature. It's not bad. I totally understand it. But this is why an agent, or this is why somebody who's in the, to your point, who has been part of so many negotiations can say this is very normal. This happens. The only way that an agent hurts, I think, the player or the athlete is when they want so much that nobody wants them anymore. That's usually in the professional leagues, though. You're talking about baseball players who may want $120 million for 2 years or $100 million for 2 years or something crazy, and nobody in the market wants that. So the agent overpriced you, and now you have to take a smaller deal or settle, and you make a lot less. In college, I don't think we're at that stage yet, other than maybe at quarterback. But even at quarterback, everyone's so desperate for the one that if you go back to other teams or other programs, I think you'll be surprised at how much they want you and how much they don't even care about that conversation that just happened. That happens in business all the time. And that's one of the shocking things when you get into business. It's like, oh, I rejected them, or we had a really bad, hard negotiation. And then you turn around and you go, oh, we're going to do business again on this other deal. There's no hard feelings. There's no feelings there. It's business.
That's correct. And, you know, sometimes the players and the parents got to think about the fact that these schools have said no to multiple players as well. Right? So, and there's plenty of situations where these players and these schools have said no to players at the beginning of that process. And then player plays really well senior year, or something else happens, and then the school's like, you know what? No, we reconsider. We like your talent. We'd like to bring you out on a visit, right? The player, in some cases, is like, yeah, for sure, I'll come out. The player, in other cases, is like, no, thank you, you know. But it's part of the business. It's part of how it works. But it's not like you're going to have a choice of two schools. There's very rare times where I run into a player and he only has two options. Right? And I mean, last player that I knew that had no options, he's still in the NFL.
So it goes back to that making something a cliff that doesn't need to be. This one decision is so big and so I have to make the right decision, because if I make the wrong decision, it's a cliff. So it's either going to be heaven or hell in my decision making. And if you can remove that from them and say it's not heaven if you make the right decision and it's not hell if you make the wrong decision, you're okay with any of these decisions. And then it settles it down to like a simmer instead of a boiling pot of water that you're panicking about.
Because of the rules, as big of a decision of where you're going to college is, it's not as big anymore. Because of all the rules, all the changes and everything that happens around college football, a lot more is not in your control. So that's why it's not of a big of a decision as it used to be. Now, I still think it's a grand decision. It's one of the biggest decisions of your life. It sets you on the right path. And, you know, making a good choice is very important. But because of the rules, because of the regulations, because of NIL, because of a lot of things, you can fix that mistake a lot easier. You can fix that mistake a lot easier. If you have a good agent, good team around you, you can fix that mistake a lot easier.
And if you're honest, you have to have an honest conversation. You can't lie to yourself. You can't say this is... You can't lie to yourself.
You can't lie to your team. You can't lie to your parents. There's no lying allowed. But you need to see the writing on the wall. Hey, I'm here. I love it here. I'm not playing. This isn't going to help me get to where I want to go. I need to make a change right now.
Yep.
You can't say, oh, because the coach is going to be like, no, you're going to compete for a spot. You got it. He needs to keep you there. It's not about you at that point. If he really doesn't want you, it really doesn't like you, he'll say, okay, I understand. You can jump in the portal. That doesn't happen that much.
So before we wrap this up, I have another question that's going to be more about the programs that you see out there. Which program do you have an eye out into next year that you feel is going to be one to watch? That I would say let's just pick a surprise one that people, everyone knows about Ohio State, everyone knows about Texas A&M, everyone knows about a lot of these programs. Is there one out there that you look at, you go, this program is doing it the right way, or they really have they're making a leap that you're seeing behind the curtain? Take us behind the curtain of what program that you think is really showing some signs.
Well, I think UNC is making a big leap, obviously, with the staff hire, with how
So
they're,
for those that don't follow, Bill Belichick got hired at North Carolina, and a lot of people laughed about this because he coached the Patriots. He's an NFL coach, and he's not very personable. And they're like, oh, yeah, this is just a publicity. Because didn't they just go from who was the coach previous that they just let go? I thought it was the coach from Texas. Was it not?
I'm not sure.
It's,
We need to cut this, though.
Eric's gonna have
know that.
Eric's gonna have to edit this. I thought it was the Texas coach, the old guy.
It is. It is Mac Brown, and I should know that because that's my cousin's head coach when he was at Texas.
All right, we'll go back to that.
Yeah.
So UNC.
So
So for those that don't know, UNC hired Bill Belichick, and I think across the board, no one's taking it as like serious. Like this is the heart and soul. And they just moved on from the coach from Texas. Who was that, Mason?
Mac Brown.
There you go. So Mac Brown to, again, you have one old coach to another old coach. And the one critique of Bill Belichick was always that he just doesn't do any of the personable stuff.
Yeah. I will say this, though. They're doing a restructure of that entire staff, and they're offering good kids. But the biggest thing in college football when you're stepping into it is you got to make sure that the money is even. If you have a fighting chance with that, then you can do some damage, right? You can compete with the bigger universities, especially when you're trying to jumpstart a new program or a program that needed some help, right? So when you have that ability to compete with other schools, right? Because again, there's going to be schools that are going to try to poach your players. There's going to be schools that are going to try to poach your recruits. If you can compete with them on a financial standpoint, get close. You don't have to always match everyone. Because, again, you do have some other leverages that other universities don't have. You have Bill Belichick, right? Then you're able to compete with a lot more universities. You're able to do things that, you'll be able to probably not be able to do as easy as another university down the street or a couple states above you that, is a good university but just doesn't have the coaching prowl or doesn't have the money that you have.
I think that the interesting aspect to me of Bill Belichick going into the university is now more like the NFL. And an NFL coach goes back to the university and doesn't have to worry about the payment of players. He brings with him, didn't he bring with him a GM that he's worked with in the past? So
yes.
He's brought there's a whole undercurrent happening besides the name of Bill Belichick, to your point.
Yes. However, there is recruiting. Recruiting is different than looking for prospects to come to your team, right? There is no, I can just draft this player and I don't have to worry about someone else re-offering this same draft pick, right?
Yep.
There is a very different structure here. Now, another school I do want to bring up, my alma mater, Duke University. They're playing this game very well. I'm actually very proud of them. They are doing something that I didn't even think that they would be doing. They're paying for really good players. They have a really good setup. They're continuing to get better and better coaches. They're continuing to upgrade that culture. There's a lot of good things brewing over there. They're continuing to attack the transfer portal and get good, experienced players. I like them. I like them a lot. And I'm looking forward to their success and hopefully see them crack top 5, top 3 in the ACC, and it'd be a normal thing for them. That's what I'm expecting out of Duke, to be a top 3 ACC school as a normal situation. That's what I'm expecting out of that university.
What's great about what you just mentioned is these two teams 10, 15 years ago were talking basketball. We're not talking football at all. These two teams are arch rivals when it comes to basketball. They're both elite basketball programs. May not be today, but back in the day they certainly were. And if you're talking football, North Carolina, Duke, this is a whole different ball of wax, if you will. This is interesting. Those are two definitely under the radar ideal programs that are going to have some interesting happenings here in the next year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that those two programs are heading in the right direction. We're going to see which model works a little bit better. Obviously, Duke is a little bit more established in college football from a coaching staff's standpoint. I know Bill brought his son over, Steve, as the defensive coordinator, but he was only at Washington for 1 year. College football and professional football are completely different beasts. Completely different beasts. You have to worry a little bit more about how you get players and how you retain players in the college market. That's the name of the game. You got to get good players and retain them.
So I would compare it to like my terrible analogies would be like if you're an NFL team, you're the peak. Players are trying to get there. When they get there, they don't have an option. They can't go anywhere. So you're trying to get to one of those NFL teams. And when you're in college, you're trying to collect as much talent as possible. So you're almost a pool as opposed to a peak. You're just trying to catch as much as possible.
Yeah, and understand this too. And this is something that I actually run into with a lot of prospective players and parents. A lot of the reason why you see some players and families take the money, which I honestly do agree with, is that the NFL is not guaranteed. But right now, there's a very big chunk of money in front of me that is pretty guaranteed. So do with that information that you will.
I'm pretty thankful for that because for a long time, these 18, 19, 20-year-olds were not getting paid, just getting scholarships. And these universities were full on getting the benefits of what these athletes were sacrificing, which is their body, their talent, and their prime. 18, 19, 20, those are some prime years of what an athlete can perform at. And to your point, it's not everybody just doesn't go to the NFL. The numbers are very, very, very low of who gets to the NFL, who gets to get paid to play. So the fact that you open this up at the university level, I think is great. More athletes are getting paid. More athletes are getting taken care of for their talents, especially as adults in America. So I couldn't be more thankful for what's going on. I know it's provided a lot more confusion of how all this is going to work. But you're here to help us, and I appreciate your insight, Mason. And for those that are out there, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like. That is Mason, the agent, the one, the only. And I am Brendan, the host. And I appreciate your time being with us today and look forward to more episodes. Thanks, everybody.
All righty.